Today, we're diving deep into one of history's most legendary turning points, the Battle of Tours. And at the heart of it all is one man, an illegitimate son who clawed his way out of a prison cell to become the de facto king of a realm. A man known to history simply as Charles Martel, the Hammer.
Oh, absolutely. And this is the classic high-stakes view, right? The historian Edward Given captured it so dramatically. He's painting this picture of a completely different future, one where if this single battle had gone the other way, the entire culture of Western Europe would have changed.
And that's the huge question we're digging into today. Was it really that simple? A straightforward clash of civilizations that decided the fate of a continent? Or was the reality, a lot messier? A story of raw ambition, political maneuvering, and even greed. Let's start with the man himself. To really get Charles Martel, you have to understand the world he was born into. The Frankish kingdom in the early 700s was, to put it mildly, a mess. It was falling apart at the seams, ruled by a dynasty that was basically a shadow of its former self, leaving this massive power vacuum just waiting for someone to fill it. Exactly. You had these Merovingian kings who were, well, kings in name only. The real power, we're talking control of the army, the money, everything that mattered, belonged to this office called the Mayor of the Palace. And one family, the Pippinids, had pretty much turned that job into their own personal kingdom. And Charles Martel's rise to power was just incredibly fast and unbelievably brutal. I mean, think about it. In 714, he's illegitimate, and his father's widow has him locked in a prison cell. Just 4 years later, by 718, he's escaped, won a bloody civil war against all his rivals, and made himself the undisputed master of the whole kingdom. That isn't luck. That's pure, uncut military and political brilliance. Right. But while Charles is busy hammering his own kingdom into submission, there's another colossal power making moves. Expanding out of the south at a stunning pace, the Umayyad Caliphate was on the march. And its sights weren't just set on Spain, they were looking right over the Pyrenees Mountains. Now, this is a really fascinating piece of the puzzle. What was driving them? It wasn't just about spreading the faith. A huge motivator was something called Ghanima, the spoils of war. We're talking wealth, land, treasure. These were powerful incentives that kept the armies moving and held together a very complex coalition of different warrior groups. So after they take Spain in 711, they push north into what we now call France, and they even capture the major city of Narbonne. But here's the thing, their advance wasn't some unstoppable juggernaut. A full decade before the famous Battle of Tours in 721, a huge Umayyad army was actually crushed at Toulouse. And the guy who beat them wasn't Charles Martel. It was his southern rival, Duke Odo of Aquitaine. And that brings our third major player onto the board, Duke Odo. He was the ruler of this independent and very wealthy region called Aquitaine, and he was in a really tough spot, literally caught between the aggressive Franks to his north and the expanding Umayyad Caliphate to his south. So, in a desperate bid to survive, Odo makes a really bold and controversial move. He cuts a deal with a rebellious Berber governor in the mountains, named Munuza, and he even marries off his own daughter to seal the alliance. For Odo, this was just smart politics, but for the Umayyad governor back in Spain, this was an act of treason, and it was an act that demanded a response. And that response comes in 732. The new governor, a man named Abd al-Rahman al-Ghafiqi, was actually a veteran of that earlier defeat at Toulouse. He was not about to let that happen again. This time, he was coming for revenge, and he brought an army built to conquer. And the invasion was just lightning fast and absolutely devastating. Al-Ghafiqi's army first crushes Odo's ally, then storms into Aquitaine. Odo tries to stop them at the River Garonne, but his army is just annihilated. The city of Bordeaux is sacked, churches are burned, it was a wave of pure destruction. Yeah, I mean, this quote from a chronicle written at the time by Christians living under Umayyad rule really says it all. The horror of that battle was so immense that they just wrote, "God alone knows the number of the slain." It wasn't just a loss, it was a catastrophe. So with his duchy in flames and his army destroyed, Odo has nowhere else to go. He flees north and is forced to do the one thing he never wanted to do, beg his bitter rival Charles Martel for help. Charles agrees, of course, but on one condition. Aquitaine's independence was over. Odo had to swear loyalty to him. And just like that, the stage was set for the showdown. Okay, so let's get to the battle itself, because Charles's approach here is absolutely key. He doesn't just charge out to meet the invaders. He's patient. He picks his ground very carefully on a wooded hill, knowing he stands no chance against their cavalry in open country. His entire plan is built on discipline, terrain, and the unique power of his Frankish army. And this table just shows you the incredible contrast. You've got the Franks, a slow, heavily armored wall of infantry, basically a human tank designed to stand its ground. And then you have the Umayyad army, all speed, all maneuverability, built around incredible horsemen. But look at that weakness. They're bogged down by all the loot they've gathered. That's a critical detail. And that same chronicle gives us this absolutely incredible image. For days, the Umayyad cavalry threw themselves against the Frankish lines, but the infantry square just held. They wouldn't budge. They absorbed every single charge, becoming what the writer called a wall of ice.
But here's the twist. The battle wasn't won by just standing there. The killing blow, the thing that actually broke the Umayyad army, came from the most unlikely person, Duke Odo. While the wall of ice was holding the front line, Odo led a raid straight into the back, at the enemy camp. When the Umayyad cavalry heard their treasure was being stolen, they panicked. They broke formation to race back and save their loot. In that chaos, their leader, Al-Ghafiqi, was caught and killed, and their army's morale just shattered.
So the next morning, it was just eerily quiet. The Franks were braced for another day of fighting, but when they looked out, the enemy camp was completely deserted. The Umayyad army, now leaderless and more worried about its treasure than the fight, had just packed up and fled in the middle of the night. The invasion was over.
So Charles wins his massive victory, but what did it all actually mean? This is where we have to peel back the layers of the legend, because the battle's most significant consequences might not be what you think they are.
Right. Historians today are pretty divided on this. You've got the traditional Gibbon view, which says Tours was the battle that saved Christendom, full stop. But then you have the revisionist view, which argues that this was really just a very large raiding party that got defeated, and that the real reason the Umayyad expansion stopped was because of their own internal problems, like a massive Berber revolt that happened a few years later.
In fact, when you look at what happened immediately after, the most direct and undeniable consequences were all political. This victory made Charles Martel the absolute, unquestioned powerhouse of the Frankish world. It was the end of Aquitaine's independence. It gave him the political justification he needed to seize church lands to pay for his army. And most importantly, it laid the foundation for his grandson, the famous Charlemagne, to build a brand new empire.
And here is one last, just fascinating detail. That same chronicle of 754, when it's describing the victorious army at Tours, it uses a new word. It calls them the Europenses, the Europeans. It's one of the very first times we ever see that term. It's almost as if, in the heat of that battle, the very idea of a shared European identity was being forged. So we'll leave you with this final thought. What if the legend of Tours, the whole story about saving civilization, was the powerful myth needed to justify what really happened? The violent creation of a new, centralized power and the birth of an empire. It really makes you question how often the stories we tell about our past are actually designed to build our future.